I work at a small convenience store located in an old, creaky building. This building has been standing for over 100 years and has seen many changes. It has a history, and sometimes that history feels very present. My night shift usually goes smoothly, but recently my workers have been complaining about strange occurrences. They hear horrible voices, see things move on their own, and occasionally catch sight of a shadow passing by. It was a quiet Thursday night when things took a turn for the worse. I arrived at the store around 10 p.m., ready for my shift. The rain was pouring heavily outside, making the old building seem even more eerie. My two co-workers, Mark and Lisa, were visibly shaken. They had been working the evening shift and looked like they couldn't wait to leave. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, noticing their pale faces. Mark glanced at Lisa before answering. "We've been hearing those voices again. And something knocked over a whole shelf of canned goods by itself." Lisa nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "And there's this shadow. It keeps passing by in the back room. We both saw it." I tried to reassure them. "I'll check it out. You two go home and get some rest." As they hurried out, I felt a chill run down my spine. I was now alone in the old spooky building. The hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of thunder added to the unsettling atmosphere. I decided to start my night by checking the back room where the shadow was reportedly seen. I grabbed a flashlight and walked towards the back, the wooden floor creaking under my feet. The back room was dimly lit, and the light flickered as if struggling to stay on. I looked around, shining my flashlight into every corner, but saw nothing unusual. "Hello?" I called out, hoping to hear nothing in return. For a moment there was only silence. Then, just as I was about to leave, I heard a faint whisper. It was so soft that I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice. My heart started to race. I turned around quickly, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls. That's when I saw it, a shadowy figure darting across the room and disappearing into the darkness. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Gathering my courage, I followed the direction the shadow had gone, but there was nothing there. The room felt colder, and I could sense an eerie presence around me. Deciding I needed to calm down, I returned to the front of the store. As I walked back, I noticed that some items on the shelves had moved. A can of soup was rolling on its own, and a packet of chips fell to the floor. I picked them up, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. "It's just the old building," I told myself, though I didn't really believe it. I sat behind the counter, keeping an eye on the security monitors. For a while, everything was quiet. Then, out of nowhere, the bell above the door rang. I looked up, but no one was there. The door was closed. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't normal. I checked the security footage. The cameras were old and the images grainy, but I could see something that made my blood run cold. A dark figure, almost like a shadow, was moving around the back room, the same one I had just investigated. It didn't look human. Its movements were erratic, and it seemed to float rather than walk. I decided to call the police. "There's someone, or something, in the store," I explained, my voice trembling. They said they would send someone over, but it might take a while due to the storm. As I waited, the situation got worse. Lights began to flicker all over the store. Products flew off the shelves as if an invisible force was throwing them. The whispering voices grew louder, almost chanting my name. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I was about to lose it when the doorbell rang again. This time, it was the police. They looked around but found no one. They suggested it might be electrical issues or my imagination, but I knew better. The building was haunted. After that night, I made a decision. I hired extra staff so no one would have to work alone, especially at night. We kept the lights bright and the doors locked. The strange occurrences continued but were less frequent. The old building still held its secrets, but at least we weren't facing them alone. To this day, I wonder about the history of that place and what kind of spirits might be trapped there. I can still hear the whispers and see the shadowy figure in my mind. The quiet nights at the convenience store are never quite as peaceful as they once were. I work at a small convenience store on the edge of town. It's a quiet place, especially at night, which is when I usually have my shift. Most people avoid working the graveyard shift, but I don't mind. I like the peace and quiet. Plus, I get to do my schoolwork and listen to music without any interruptions. One Friday night around midnight, I was alone in the store. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional car passing by on the highway. I was stocking shelves, trying to keep busy, when the bell above the door rang. I looked up, expecting to see a customer, but no one was there. I shrugged it off, thinking it must have been the wind. I went back to my work, but a few minutes later I heard a noise coming from the back of the store. It sounded like someone knocking on the storage room door. My heart started to race. I was sure I had locked the door when I started my shift. I grabbed my flashlight and walked slowly to the back. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer. I reached the storage room and tried the doorknob. It was locked. I felt a little better knowing that no one could be inside. I decided to check the security cameras to see if I could spot anything unusual. I went to the office and turned on the monitor. The cameras showed the empty aisles of the store, the parking lot, and the back entrance. Everything looked normal, but then I noticed something strange. In the camera that pointed toward the storage room, I saw a dark figure standing just outside the door. It was tall and shadowy, with no distinguishable features. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but the figure was still there. It seemed to be staring right at the camera. A chill ran down my spine. I decided to go back to the storage room and confront whatever was there. I didn't want to, but I needed to make sure I wasn't imagining things. As I approached felt a cold draft. The air grew heavy, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I turned the corner and saw the figure standing in front of the door. It was even taller and more menacing in person. Its eyes were just dark voids, and it felt like they were sucking the light out of the room. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure slowly raised its arm and pointed at me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the door to the storage room swung open, and the figure disappeared inside. I stood there, staring at the open door, trying to muster the courage to follow. Taking a deep breath, storage room. The light flickered as I entered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The room was empty, but I could feel a presence. It felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I shined my flashlight around, looking for any signs of the figure. Then I heard a whispering, like someone was speaking just behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was speaking a language I couldn't understand, but the tone was menacing. I backed out of the room, my hands shaking. I locked the storage room door and ran back to the office. I checked the cameras again, but the figure was gone. The store looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, lurking in the shadows. For the rest of my shift, I stayed in the office, too scared to go back out into the store. I kept watching the cameras, but nothing else happened. When my shift finally ended, I practically ran out of the store, not looking back until I was safely in my car. The next day, I told him. He laughed and said it was probably just my imagination, but I knew what I saw. I couldn't get the image of that dark figure out of my mind. I decided to switch to the day shift after that. I didn't want to be alone in that store at night ever again. To this day, I don't know what I saw or what it wanted, but I know it was real. The graveyard shift may seem quiet and peaceful, but sometimes the silence hides something much more sinister. I worked at a small convenience store in the early 1990s. We had one of those fry dailies that served chicken, corn dogs, burritos, and other quick snacks. Most nights were quiet, especially the late shifts. I liked the peace and routine of it. One night, I had just finished cleaning the fryer. We had run out of burritos and chicken earlier in the evening, so I shut everything down about an hour before closing. The store was almost empty, and I was looking forward to closing up and going home. Just as I was about to lock the doors, a man walked in. He looked tired and a bit scruffy. He came straight to the counter and asked for some burritos. I told him, "I'm sorry, but we're out of burritos and I've already shut down the fryer for the night." He didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded and started walking around the store. I assumed he was looking for something else to buy. I watched him from the corner of my eye while I finished my closing tasks. A few minutes later, he came back to the counter. I expected him to buy a drink or some chips, but instead, he pulled out a knife. My heart skipped a beat. "Cook me some burritos," he said, his voice calm but with a dangerous edge. "Or I'm going to stab you." I felt a surge of fear, but I tried to stay calm. "I really don't have any burritos," I said, my voice shaking a little. "Look, I'll show you." I slowly walked to the freezer, making sure to keep my movements slow and non-threatening. He followed me, the knife still in his hand. I opened the freezer and showed him the empty shelves where the burritos usually were. "See? We're out of burritos. I'm sorry, but I can cook anything else you want from here. We have corn dogs, chicken nuggets, anything but burritos." He looked inside the freezer for a long moment, then turned to me. His eyes were cold and calculating. "You really are out," he said, almost to himself. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound as calm as possible. "I'm really sorry." For a few seconds we just stood there, staring at each other. Then, to my immense relief, he put the knife away. He didn't say anything else, just turned and walked out of the store. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Once I was sure he was gone, I quickly locked the door and called the police. The officers arrived a few minutes later. I told them what had happened, and they took my statement. They looked around the store and checked the security footage, but the man was already long gone. They promised to patrol the area and keep an eye out for him. After they left, I finished closing up the store. My hands were still shaking as I counted the cash and turned off the lights. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to being stabbed over a burrito. The next day, I told my boss about what happened. He was shocked and promised to install better security measures, including a panic button under the counter. I was grateful, but the incident left a lasting impact on me. For weeks, I was jumpy and nervous, especially during the late shifts. Every time someone walked into the store, I felt a spike of anxiety. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting the man with the knife to come back. But he never did, and gradually I started to feel more at ease. Working the night shift at a convenience store had always felt routine and safe. But that night showed me that danger can come out of nowhere, even in the most familiar places. It's a lesson I'll never forget.